All right. Welcome to my thoughts and opinions on the latest expansion announcement. Before I get started, I would like to say that first of all, I am excited about the expansion. I do like the game, uh, believe it or not. Depending on, and no matter what I say, I'm still excited about it, and I do actually like the game. It is quite fun. I do have some nitpicks, things that bother me, but that's not because I hate the game. It's because some of the aspects of the game are not the way I prefer it, and some things, in my opinion, are bugged out and don't work the way that they are intended to work. So, with that out of the way, I am excited about the game. I do want to play more. I'm going to make more videos on it, and I'm going to play the expansion when it comes out and make videos on it. And I hope it meets some of my expectations. So let's go over uh, what was announced and my opinions and thoughts, which are more than likely not going to be shared by everyone who watches this video, and that's okay. These are my opinions. So we're going to get a new storyline, which is great. X4 desperately needs more story content, in my opinion, and I think and this is a positive thing, a net positive for me. So that sounds good. Everything around there is pretty hype, and I hope that they can deliver what they need or what I would like them to deliver. Uh, and then this is interesting as well. Scenarios and unlocks. So part of the problem with X4, well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a problem. It's a lack of content. X4 is it's a big universe sim with a lot of sectors in it, but there really isn't a lot of things going on. It's the same problem with Elite Dangerous is a easy one to compare to because Elite Dangerous has it's a big game. There's a whole bunch of universes and sectors, and there's a bunch of planets and things and star systems out there. But Elite Dangerous is known to be the mile-wide, 1-inch deep swimming pool. It has a lot of things, but there's no depth to it. And to some extent, X4 also does not have a lot of story content. There's not a lot of depth to keep the player engaged in. Once you get once you get to a point where you can build your own stations and then start building your own ships, you've kind of hit the late game, and there really isn't a whole lot left to do. There's like super late game stuff like terraforming, but it isn't exactly the most engaging content. As someone who did a full playthrough and terraformed every single planet and eliminated the xenon from the galaxy, I can very reassuredly say that it took a while. It did take a noticeably long time, but it wasn't exactly the most fun or interesting content. I went through and played every mission. I found all the data vaults. I've done every quest. I've done it all there is to do in vanilla game and the expansions. And all of that is available to watch on my YouTube channel. So it's not coming out of nowhere when I say that it needs more story content. The game does need more things to do. And it's a sandbox adventure, so part of playing this game is you setting your own goals and deciding how much you want to play or how little. So a lot of it is on the player. So these immersive and unique unlock scenarios is kind of exciting because uh, these are shouldn't the way I think these are going to be introduced and after reading on the Discord is these are going to be separate scenarios that you go through the new game menu to unlock. They might be like one sector only simulated a universe with only one sector in it, and they may have their own. unique storylines to push through, and then once you get through those storylines, you'll unlock an option in a budgeted start or um, what I actually think right here is you get when you go back to the main game, the sandbox universe, you get to unlock maybe special equipment or special ships that you can use only after you've done these scenarios. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's great. They if they do this the way I hope they will, and have these as like separate scenarios that are like their own individual things, I actually think that'll be some great story content. And if it can be focused and a fun playthrough for people like me who's looking to get a little more out of the game, great. And I hope that that is some really focused content. It's entertaining from start to finish, and that's what I'm really hoping for. Getting out into the sandbox and like doing a whole playthrough where you go through and do all the terraforming, and then find something to do in the meantime and set your own goals can get a little stale from time to time. So if it's a fresh new experience every time you fire up a scenario, great. And this is not the full description of what the DLC was, I believe. So let's go over into here and just kind of go through point by point that's interesting. So thrilling new storyline that will take place outside of the uh, X4 sandbox, which is good. Hopefully that'll be a great narrative storyline, and you know, I can want what I, ideally what I want is like 20 plus hours of content, of narrative driven content. Now then, I highly doubt there will be 20 straight hours of just narrative content, nonstop action and enjoyment. I don't think that's what will be delivered. It's what I want. And I mean, well, you know, it's at least what I think I want. So, will they deliver some of that? Probably. Will it be like 20 complete hours of something new every second? No, I doubt that. So, there's going to be a free update along with the paid DLC, which will be nice. Bug fixing, adding in content or fixing content. Bug fixes are always appreciated. There are a few bugs that drive me crazy, so that'd be cool if a lot of the bug fixes get pushed through. And the the CEO has mentioned in 2 videos or even more that constantly working on stability improvements and bug fixing is one of their big focuses that they focus on. And the repetition at which they say stability is important to them is believable. The game runs extraordinarily stable. Even when I have crazy amounts of mods, it's a very stable game. So I do appreciate their work on that. It's a nice little shout out to them, and they mention it fairly often. It is one of their big focuses, and I'm grateful for that. So the timelines DLC will add scenarios. We already went over that. And a new storyline, which is separate from that. We've already been over those 2 things. So they showcased a whole bunch of new ships, not just these ships, the Behemoth E and the Phoenix E, or whatever the Talati ships are, the E variant. They've shown the names of those ships off, but as you can see, even in this, there are more ships that are left unnamed, and I think these are updates on older ships from previous games. And they showed off a whole bunch in the trailer, which was pretty cool. So hopefully we get a whole bunch more ships to play with, and hopefully they're going to be awesome capital ships and things to use that are actually good at maybe destroying stations. There's a real lack of ships that can actually destroy stations in the game, in my opinion. I think one of the only One of the most reliable ways to destroy a station is to get a whole bunch of behemoth vanguards and put the main guns on them and send like a swarm of like 20 to 40 at stations to destroy them. And that is one of the only ways to reliably destroy stations, in my opinion. And contrary to popular belief, a Asgard or a fleet of them does not do well in the AI hands. In the player's hands, that's a different story, but then you're personally going out and destroying every station if you want to fly that ship personally, which it's a lot of work. So that could be one area of improvement that I hope they work on. And then let's see here, there are some other things to talk about. New sectors, neat. New Xenon ships, so more the Xenon will get more threatening. And surprise veteran X4 pilots. That sounds good on paper. Um, Punishing the player right from the get-go and then constantly hounding the player as they start a new game can be a detriment. So I'm interested to see how this will affect new players. People who have played the game for a long time can. It's at most an annoyance early game, and then late game it doesn't matter anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what the surprise is for veterans without punishing the new player experience too hard. This is particularly interesting right here is the external camera is extraordinarily lacking in my opinion right now before this update comes out. And some of the issues that I have with the external camera is it's just positioned dead center behind a lot of the ships. And that's not really great because you can't really see where you're going in a lot of the ships. Some ships it works fairly okay on, but another big problem that I have with the external camera is the engines. The way the engine plume or when you activate and drive an engine, it just completely fills your screen up with light and you're effectively flashbanged and can't see anything anymore. So that is one of the problems I have with the external camera is you just can't see anything. And the whole point of using the external camera is to see more and be able to fly your ship from that, including being able to do combat or whatever you want to do to actually even just fly the ship. So that I'm really glad that they're updating the external camera. I think this should be a good change, and I can't wait to try it. And hopefully it'll meet my expectations. Now this is one of the big ones, the existential crisis. So a new in-game challenge for veterans to face off against a faction that goes all out against you. On paper this sounds good, and it can be opted out of, that's a good choice, I believe. For new players, they might not want a faction right at the start of the game just gunning for them. That's a very punishing experience to be singled out and attacked constantly throughout the game. So for new players, that should be more than likely something to opt out of until you want to try. And the only issues that worry me about this is that this is adding a new faction, and in my economy video, I already explained why the economy is terrible, and so I hope this faction doesn't have a terrible economy. And to go over that quickly, the reason the X4 universe has a terrible economy is because right at the start of the game, every faction has full stockpiles of resources, and then they drain and expend their resources extraordinarily quickly. And then the production that every single faction in the game, except for the Vigor, uh, their the logistics of trying to keep up with ship demand is extraordinarily inadequate. And I actually have an example of this in my modded playthrough. The In order to keep up with one faction one faction ship demands. I need 50 whole part makers on one station, on the station that can make ships. 50 whole part makers, and at most I think AI stations have two, and they only have like one or two whole part makers in a sector, and at most in the whole faction's control, they have up to maybe 4 to 6 total whole part makers in the whole galaxy. So total whole part maker, like 6 or 8 whole part making facilities, which is woefully inadequate for one single faction. Like I said, I needed 50 to keep up with one faction's demand of ships. So, on one hand, the action that happens at the start of the game, the wars, the AI do war against each other, but once they run out of the stockpiles right at the beginning and you get that flash in the pan of what it could be, your galaxy is functionally in a very dead, stale state, and they barely have enough production to hold off the Xenon. And the reason that they can hold off the Xenon isn't because they're making ships, it's because their defense stations um, are well built and well placed in base game. So their defense stations are putting in a lion's share of the work and holding off a Xenon threat. And then there's also the ATF faction, which is a sub-faction of the Terrans, if you own that DLC. They're not listed in game, but you see their Asgard and usually a carrier uh, patrolling around where Xenon incursions happen. So there's that faction who constantly goes around and picks fights with the Xenon, or usually cleans up an incursion. And then some factions like the Paranid can deal with the Xenon threat fairly well on their own as well. But for the most part, and I think this is most easily noted in the split faction territories, their defense station is what's keeping them alive. And eventually, the Xenon will send out enough Ks or Is to destroy the defense station. And once they start doing that, the split empire falls apart and crumbles. And they especially can't keep up with their own ship demand. No faction can. So it's on the player to prop up any faction's economy to the point that they can actually manufacture ships. And so for the Terran economy, the Terran economy is the easiest economy to prop up because it doesn't need so many production structures. I think you only need up to about 10, or not even that many. I think you need like 2 metallic microlattice, like 1 silicon carbide, and 1 Computronic substrate, and you can kind of get the Terran economy up and going and make a lot of money from that. But at most, maybe like 6 of each production structure, and enough, obviously enough resources to come in and supply those structures. So that economy is easy enough to get propped up and let them actually function as a faction. The rest of the factions, especially the base game factions, that would be the Argon, Antigon, Talati, the Paranid, the Split as well, and the Boron. And I know the Split and Boron are DLC factions, but the other factions, all of those factions they don't use the closed loop manufacturing process for their ships, so they need all of the Commonwealth items to produce ships. So that'd be your advanced electronics, your advanced composites, turret components, drone components, engine components, all of these components. And it's like there's like 20 or so. So it takes a while to build all of those up, and they don't have enough production. They don't have enough ore refining and silicon refining to feed all of their individual stations enough silicon and ore to then produce enough of these advanced electronics is going to be a huge bottleneck, for instance. So they don't have enough material suppliers, and they don't have enough mining ships to supply their stations that can process mining materials as well. And if they did, the game would slow down to an absolute crawl, and you'd get like 1 FPS. But whatever faction that you prop up is the faction that's going to dominate, and it'll take a very long time to get to that point, especially without mods. And you can actually see an example of that throughout my YouTube playthrough. I think, well, actually, there is no really good example, but I did prop up the Terran economy. And as a consequence of that, the ATF faction was actually out and about more often doing what they are programmed to do, which is go play with the Xenon. So this existential crisis it could be really interesting to see whichever faction you have propped up and made an economy for that actually can sustain ship production for even just the player themselves to fight against. But one of the large worries I have for this new faction is it's an additional faction, so already that's another FPS hit against you. But then my fears with this faction is that they're just going to have a stockpile of resources that they get as soon as you opt into and start challenging them. They're going to then deplete their stockpile of resources. And then they are going to have a severely crippled economy like every other faction in the game. And then you are going to very easily steamroll them once you get over that initial burst that they have. And so this extra faction that goes against you will then just be another boring generic faction that is very easy to handle and deal with. So this sounds like a good idea on paper, but I am cautious about the existential crisis, or the end game crisis, as some people call it. So this is something I will fight against and try. I already have my unmodified vanilla game with a couple of factions that I've propped up. I can build up a huge fleet and fight against this faction. I'm ready to go as soon as this releases if my saved game carries over, which it's unmodified, so I don't see why it shouldn't. So I will be ready to fight this crisis as soon as the DLC drops. So that'll be interesting to try out. Oh, and then engine improvements. I thought they meant actual ship improvements. So, like I said, they're constantly trying to refine the game's engine and make it run better, and then maybe they can add actually give factions an economy to build ships and fight with, and it can actually be the game that you think this game is when you first buy it, which is all the factions are fighting and there's lots of space battles to go try and get into and lots of fun, constant engaging content all the time instead of you just standing around on a ship or sitting around if you're playing unmodified in a ship out in space in set mode waiting for anything interesting to happen. So it's good. The continuous game engine improvement it's always a good thing, and hopefully they improve on some of the bugs. And I'm going to throw in this just in case they are watching. And some of the improvements that I would like to um, see is carriers. Anything to do with carriers is, uh, in my opinion, lackluster. And I'm a player that doesn't mess around with missiles and torpedoes a lot. I do like to see the spectacle of having direct fire weapons be the primary weapons I use for turrets, main weapons, all that. I like direct fire, and I like to see the spectacle, and I want to see like a giant space battle, and I want to be the cameraman who flies around and looks at all the cool stuff. So that's what's exciting to me, and I'm not sure if maybe we're supposed to be using missiles for everything, and the missiles that they kind of have a trail, as you can see, but for the most part, you just look at the ship and wait for an explosion to happen isn't necessarily engaging for me or a lot of fun. You can't see the projectiles. It's not the most fun. And so I'd like carriers to be improved. And one of the major problems with carrier ships in general is the docking and undocking with ships, and then ships also slamming into the carrier's collision box. And what that does is when ships go to dock, sometimes they get stuck in uh, the model of the carrier, and then they end up pushing the carrier sideways as fast as the small ship can go, and pushing it way out of the combat zone and like way out in the middle of nowhere. And if the bug doesn't resolve itself, they end up way out in the in nowhere space, and all of your ships end up dying, losing. If you the player are around that at all, you may notice that. And that's because you're in sector or you're in high attention and you're looking around, looking at the combat, and that's where I want to be most of the time is in that high attention combat where you can actually see what's going on because that's fun for me. And so one of the major bugs is that ships get stuck. Usually your ships when they come to dock or launch. But then there's also a problem with enemy ships just slamming into the hull of your ship. They fly right into it, and then they also get stuck, and then go fly. Your ship goes um, flying off, like I said. And another problem that exacerbates this is repair drones. Repair drones are a huge problem for any ship that the player is on because as soon as you start to move the ship, they either get left behind or again stuck in the hitbox of the ship or the unit model. They get stuck in there and then cause problems like not being able to steer the ship. And then you fling your ship out in the middle of nowhere and you don't know why you can't move your ship at all. And it's because that one ship or the one drone is stuck inside the hitbox or the unit model and is not allowing you to move your ship. So I would like improvements on that so we can actually use carriers and actually be in the same system with carriers and watch the spectacle happen in front of our eyes instead of watching a minimap from 4 sectors away so that no unit models or collision hitboxes are actually spawned in. It's all just graphically represented on a minimap. Because when you're not in a sector, the universe despawns. And when you're 2 sectors away, or actually when you get just far enough away in the same sector, everything despawns. And that's for FPS, of course. And to make the game actually playable, it has to despawn a whole bunch of things, and only a little sphere around the player is actually spawned in. Everything else is just uh, represented on a map. And that when that happens for all combat, all of your ships stop being actual combat vessels, and all of the enemy ships stop being actual combat vessels, and all they are graphically represented on a map, and they're just stat sticks. And at that point, they don't dodge anymore. Shots can't miss, for instance, and so it's really just do I have enough ships and do my ships that are stat sticks have stats that beat the enemy ship? And if the answer to those is yes, then congratulations, you win the combat. So that is kind of part of the late game problem too, because once you can build up to that point of having carriers and ships and enough ships to actually engage in big fleet battles, uh, yeah, you can't just be around it because it doesn't function very well when you are around it. Too many ships get stuck inside each other, or if you're not doing carrier combat, your ships then get stuck into the enemy unit models, and the same problem happens there. So it's not exactly a thrilling experience. So hopefully that problem can be worked on. I've seen some very creative ways of solving a carrier problem, which is to have ships that are coming into dock or launch just teleport directly to and from the landing pad once they get close enough to the ship. And I think that's a good creative solution because then ships can't get stuck while they're trying to launch or while they're trying to land. And that in one way that's a great solution because if you've already seen the docking and taking off animations, then you don't need to see them 1,000 times. It's really cool to see it every time, but if you're actually just trying to win the space combat, you don't need to see that every time. And actually having functional ships is way more exciting than having ships that don't function. I think we're actually seeing a collision problem happening here in this clip here. It looks like the ship is popping through the other ship right there at the end. So that's fun. So it looks like in 7.0 we're still having the same problem I've been describing the whole time. So hopefully that gets fixed and ship combat becomes viable because right now it's kind of broken. And yeah, for the timeline expansions, that will be most of my opinions and thoughts. I am excited about it. I do want to try it. It does look like it'll be some fun, and I'll make some content on it. It'll be a good time. And I can play the sandbox and set my own goals and have my own adventure, and it should be a great little DLC. But I don't want to say that this should be really hyped up too much. You shouldn't be overhyped for this. We don't want a Cyberpunk 2077 here where it looks like they're going to drastically change the game and add like all sorts of fun and crazy things that we've never seen before. For the most part, I think the game will stay relatively the same. And when you go into the sandbox experience, it's going to be relatively the same game with maybe a couple of, maybe like two or three quest lines and a total of maybe like 20 spoken voice lines total. Just an estimation. I don't have any evidence to back that up. So don't don't I don't think we should set our expectations too high. I'm definitely not. I'm coming into this with zero expectations. I expect very minimal amount of voice lines and story missions, and if they deliver a whole bunch of story content that's lots of fun, then that's all the better for me because I came into it with low expectations, and if they blow my expectations out of the water, that's excellent. That's what I'm hoping they do. So that'll be my thoughts and opinions on this DLC, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.